Torna Fem Ciència, una sèrie per repensar el feminisme, la història i la cultura científica. Aquesta 5a temporada està dedicada a les ciències quàntiques. Avui parlarem amb Joanna Behrman, investigadora postdoctoral a la Universitat de Copenhaguen de Dinamarca. Els seus temes d'estudi s'emmarquen en la història de la física, el gènere i l'educació, especialment en el context estatunidenc. Aviat es publicarà el seu llibre A New History of American Women in Physics. Podeu trobar més informació a la seva pàgina web personal. És la història de la ciència sexista?
Is there a lot of sexism in the history of physics? Yes. But are historians of science, many of them also sexist, and so also interpreting that history in a sexist way? The way history of science is often written compounds the sexism of the past, is maybe how I would put it.
L'any 2025 ha estat declarat l'Any Internacional de les Ciències i les Tecnologies Quàntiques. Què en penses de les commemoracions científiques, i en particular d'aquesta?
Commemorations in general are quite a lot of fun. It's usually fun to have an excuse to throw a party or to celebrate things. Of course, commemorations always come with their own dangers. Not everything deserves to be celebrated or should be celebrated. And sometimes we have to be careful with the way that we celebrate things so that it's not open to either a bad interpretation or that it's exclusionary of people who ought to be included in that celebration.
La física quàntica està mitificada com un pensament masculí. Però realment, quin paper van tenir les dones en el desenvolupament de la física quàntica durant el segle XX?
Women have played a number of different roles in the development of quantum physics. There have been, sure, sometimes what seems to be moments or flashes of brilliance from individuals. Very often it's more of a collaborative effort amongst many people. Some people help make great theoretical leaps forward. Other people do more of the less glamorous labor, say, that helps launch those huge advances. And it's usually the people who make the huge advances that get credited. To complicate the answer a little bit, there have been women doing important theoretical work. There have also been women doing important experimental work, same as with men. Certainly the percentages are a little bit skewed because it was easier for women to work in experimental physics than it was in theoretical physics. But nevertheless, you do see some great theoretical female physicists like Jane Dewey, for example.
Durant la teva estada a l'arxiu Niels Bohr de l'AIP vas revisar i recuperar fotografies entre d'altres materials, algunes d'elles de fa 100 anys, del moment en què es va fundar la física quàntica. Podries explicar quines dones vas trobar en aquestes fotografies i quins reptes va implicar?
Done quite a bit of what I think of as fun diving into rabbit holes in order to identify some of the people in the photograph collections. The Niels Bohr Library and Archives that has a huge photograph collection called the Emilio Segre Visual Archives. But not all the photographs are completely identified and labeled. So, for example, one photograph that I came across dates from around 1913, and it shows a laboratory tea party in Zurich and the laboratory of Pierre Weiss. But my attention was very much captured by 3 women in the photograph who were not completely labeled or incorrectly labeled. One of them was labeled as a Russian woman. 2 others were sort of a Dutch last name, which turned out not to be correct on any account. I tried to push that history as far as I could, and I ended up coming up quite short in a number of instances with these women, but it was very interesting to find out who these women were not. So, for example, I discovered that one of the women was credited as being Marie Grigoriev, a translator of a particular physics textbook from Russian into German, but she was also not even in the photograph. And I find this is quite common with women in the history of physics, although it goes for assistants in physics or less glamorous people in physics in general. They don't get recorded as much.
Ets una col·laboradora molt activa a la Viquipèdia, havent creat més de 800 entrades. On dibuixes la línia entre la recuperació històrica i la heroificació de figures femenines com a casos excepcionals?
It's a very difficult line to walk. From my line of thinking, because I think everyone's story is important. And also I'm a bit sick, to be honest, of so many stories about Einstein or other famous physicists, that I more am interested in these lesser known figures. When it comes to a platform like Wikipedia, it's a bit hard to get away from the history as, just important figures and important events. Because Wikipedia has a rule about notability. Any article or any biography that goes up on the website has to be notable in some way. When I create these biographies, I have to justify why they should be on Wikipedia. And so I have to say, oh, this is a great person because of these reasons. And that's, I think, good to do. The more people who are important to history on Wikipedia, the less it becomes a history of great figures, because if everyone is great, and the coverage of Wikipedia is very much dominated by the history of men in physics. So just by adding some women, I can help balance it out. But it is still a history of great people doing great things.
En un dels teus articles mostres que als Estats Units, fins a principis del segle XX, la física o la filosofia natural, com es coneixia llavors, es considerava un tema bastant femení entre les classes altes. Ens podries parlar una mica d'aquest context i explicar per què i com a principis del segle XX l'ensenyament de la física es va masculinitzar tant?
It's a history that's a bit peculiar to the United States, because in the late 18th century, it's starting its own country. There's a kind of philosophical question in the air, which is, what does it mean to be a citizen? And how do we train people to be good citizens? So this brings a need to train the women, who can then train the men and train the children and teach the children about how to be good citizens. Have at the same time a movement called natural theology, which is all about how we can see God in nature. So the way you teach religion is then by teaching science. And so women are taught science in order that they can pass along religious values and religious education to their children. A historian by the name of Kim Tolley has done some great statistical analysis of enrollment. And she's found that for the vast majority of it, more girls than boys were enrolled in physics. And this was because it was natural philosophy, as it was called then. But it was still, very similar in other respects to the physics we would recognize today. Did it through a religious lens, and specifically a Christian lens, of course. Now, what changed? In the latter part of the 19th century and in the early 20th century, you have a couple of movements that all, once again, coincide to cause this big cultural shift. You have, first off, colleges are more and more starting to open up to women. These women's colleges want to compete with the men's colleges. And so they start pushing more and more of the classics so that they can be seen as good as the men's colleges. Physics is also becoming more of a profession. And finally, you have just a huge surge of enrollment in public education. There is now also pressure on the local and state level to make these schools relevant for children. And relevant means useful for their trades. And so girls get pushed out of other classes and into these fields, like typing and home economics, that are considered to be more useful for them.
Ens podries explicar el boom dels cursos de física domèstica als Estats Units? Es van introduir conceptes relacionats amb la quàntica?
That is related to women finding a niche in science, where it's very acceptable to study biology, nutrition, chemistry, physics, as long as it's related to something with regards to the household. It was a little bit more difficult for physics. There weren't that many aspects of physics that were present in the household, until you get to boom, I would say, really, of the electrical appliances in the household. These are coming, of course, in addition to gas and indoor plumbing and all of those other things. But electrical appliances seem to really be the turning point. These textbooks, which is the way that I've primarily looked at this field, were such a huge source of advertisement for various companies. And the chapters on light tended to be from, say, Westinghouse or General Electric. The kinds of experiments that students would do along with these classes are very similar in many respects to what students in modern day introductory physics classes would do.
Podries explicar-nos el terme llibres de cuina del laboratori?
It's used very casually by physics educators, even currently in contemporary times, to mean a teaching laboratory where students follow a very pre-prescribed set of directions. You know, you do number one, then you do number two, then you do number three, and then you come out with this answer that you should have known all along. And so there's very little variation, there's very little exploration. There isn't even anything really unknown about it. I've discovered in the course of my research on it that it probably originates in the early 1900s from chemistry or chemical engineering. And researchers becomes distinguished a bit from analysts in a kind of classist and definitely sexist way. Most analysts at that time are, well, not most, but a lot of them are women, and most of the researchers are men. And so a researcher is someone who is able to do some kind of free analysis, free thinking, independent thought with regards to some scientific procedure. Whereas an analyst can only follow those step-by-step instructions like a cookbook. And so it's not clear if this was deliberate on the part of the people who invented and started using this term, but it's certainly a very interesting coincidence that at the time they're criticizing all of these many female analysts for only following instructions and not even doing that very well. They're also creating this term, which certainly has sexist connotations, I would argue, to describe their work.
Thank you very much, Joanna. Per cert, les properes entrevistes de Fem Ciència no es publicaran fins l'octubre de 2025. Queden 2 entrevistes i una taula rodona amb membres de Women in the History of Quantum Physics. Qualsevol cosa teniu al correu femciencia2@gmail.com. Fins aviat!